Rachel, good afternoon. Got your coffee?
Hi, let's see.
That is a black one, no milk, yeah?
Excellent. Just
Okay. Just what you. Thank you so much for meeting with me today. I want to talk to you about MiFID II.
Yeah.
Wherever I go, I hear that this is something that is a major source of focus, it's a major source of energy, and actually it's hard and difficult.
Yeah.
MiFID II, there's a 2 there which says to me, this sounds a bit like a trilogy in the making.
Quite possibly.
There's a box set on its way. So before MiFID II, there was MiFID I.
Yeah.
What is MiFID? What was it trying to achieve? And what is it that MiFID II is trying to improve or fix?
Okay, so MiFID first time round was really about increasing competition in the marketplace. Obviously there were lots of, incumbent exchanges and they wanted to open that up, and MTFs came about, and that really did increase competition, but unfortunately then there were some unintended consequences. Fragmentation of all that liquidity led to there being actually worse data challenges, like best execution actually became more difficult. People were having to look around for various data sources to compile the market together, because if you look at the US, they've got consolidated tape, and that's something that just didn't happen under MiFID I, which I think the regulators had hoped it would. You can see in MiFID II now that's something that they are actually addressing, but still it's not mandated in a way that it has actually had an impact, and this still doesn't look like there would be a consolidated tape under MiFID II.
Okay.
So, you might be right, there could be a MiFID III if that's something that doesn't get resolved. And also, execution costs did go down under MiFID, but MiFID II, there are other challenges. There are a lot of efficiencies to be had in the sort of collateral margin space. So there's still a lot of cost savings in the industry, but ultimately there's a whole raft of other areas that MiFID originally didn't even touch on. So for example, MiFID II is really looking at investor protection and really like crisis management. What do we do if there's another crisis? How do we make sure the markets are stable? What do we do for the client base? A very big political will, obviously, to make sure that the end investor is protected. So there's a massive focus there. I think that's a key area.
Well, you've covered a lot of ground there, and you're right. MiFID II is very complex and it's very wide-reaching. But what I'm still trying to get my head around is it trying to deal? Well, I was always led to believe that markets always get to the most efficient point. Leave it alone. We don't need government intervention. Yep. Markets will always get to an equilibrium point that is Pareto optimal. But MiFID II is pretty wide-ranging. Things like best execution, things like improving liquidity, collateral management, and the like, ensuring that that information and pricing is better served. That points to shortcomings in the market or market failure. Is that really what MiFID II is trying to fix?
I mean, to some extent, there are various arguments about what's actually going on in the market and whether the pricing is correct. But when I think of pricing, I don't necessarily think of just, what's the price for a stock in the market. It's really about the whole service. It's the whole chain. When you have a client, like, are you offering them the right service for them? Is it, appropriate for what they need? Is it suitable? And, therefore is the pricing structure correct for what they're after? And I think that is really where the focus when it comes to pricing is on a MiFID II basis. I mean, of course, people have had concerns in the past about, do we have full visibility of the market at any one time? And with equities, obviously that's come a long way since MiFID originally, and the concern now maybe is across transparency in the non-equities market. What's going on there is still opaque entirely in some places, and therefore the regulators can't be sure what's going on because they don't have any visibility. So really, MiFID II is trying to take on the whole cross-asset thing and make that more transparent.
So that puts quite a burden on financial sector firms. So if I were a CIO or I were a business unit manager, where would my focus points be? Let's start off in the middle office and maybe move towards the back office.
I think data management, wherever you are in the firm, is really a key starting place. Various aspects of the regulation all come back to how you deal with data. You've got, real-time risk analytics, you've got reporting, you've all the way front to back. You've got to be looking at the data, extra fields that are being required under the regulations, really getting to the point where firms have to build like data warehouses of their own to really handle what the requirements of the regulation are.
I spoke with Vipul Chandna in one of our previous sessions, and for him, in dealing with regulatory response, he said the centerpiece of any enterprise architecture had to be data management. Is that a view that you would concur with?
Totally. And I don't come from a technology background. I've always come from a kind of front office product management background. But in watching MiFID II happen and then seeing what's happening now, I definitely think that to cope with the regulation, to actually implement it, you really have got to look at the front to back systems. You've got to look at how agile they are and how good at processing data they are.
But doesn't that sort of point to perhaps a shortcoming amongst many players, in that whether they've grown through acquisition or through merger, there's a lot of legacy out there, very proprietary systems, or because of these acquisitions, there's a real sort of spaghetti of IT infrastructure. A lot of that data is stuck.
It is. I've worked at a tier 1 bank before, and to phase out any system would take a very long time. And there are always dependencies on old systems and old ways of doing things. And you only have to have one client that needs an old system, and you can't get rid of it. There are challenges for tier 1 firms when it comes to actually putting the pieces of their different systems and architecture together. And I think that's why when we look at maybe what opportunities are there, you can see that maybe the smaller, newer, more agile tech-focused companies, the whole fintech thing that's coming out, there are firms that are going to be well placed because they are going to build their infrastructure post MiFID I. They've really had a chance to get that right, and that will be the downside for the big firms who just don't have that luxury.
So is there to the extent to which this analogy stacks up, MiFID II feels a little to me almost like one of those sort of Y2K time bombs. If we're going to comply with the legislation, the size and scale of the change that many financial services firms are going to have to undertake, it's of that sort of effort. Am I over-egging this?
Well, I think that you really have to take a step back as a firm and look at who you are in the marketplace and what it is you do, what it is you want to do going forwards. Any one firm's business model is really going to drive what they do and don't need to do out of MiFID II. And ultimately, you can tweak your business model to make sure you do comply with the regulation, and there'll always be winners and losers. And so for some firms, maybe this will feel like a massive, expensive exercise that they're not going to get a lot out of. But at the same time, there'll always be someone in the marketplace who's actually doing well out of the situation.
Okay. Well, that's an interesting point, because I guess in some ways the world's moved on, and unless you have an agile enterprise architecture, you'll be hamstrung.
Yeah, I think truly asset agnostic platforms, that's where it is at the moment. You look at the regulation and it is all about cross asset. So for those firms that are trading cross assets and they have built their systems to cope with that and not to be so specific on any one asset class, they're really going to be in a good place right now. And that tie-in the front office to the middle office and to the back office is really where the focus needs to be. And equally outward, when you go to your clients and you're offering them trading platforms, the more inefficiencies there, the worse for them. It's not now just, okay, I'm going to go to my broker and the regulations on them and they'll fix everything for me. Your clients are ultimately having to make sure they're compliant too. And so if, as a service provider, you are able to give them a platform that really ticks a lot of boxes for them, it means they don't have to be under the burden of some of these regulatory aspects, the better. And that, that's just part of a value-added service these days.
At one level, if you're sort of sitting back almost from an academic point of view, everything you've spoken about makes perfect sense. It's about more information, it's about treating customers better, it's about joining everything up, it's having that sort of straight through process. But I think how long it took for us to get to T+2.
Yeah.
I mean, America's grappling with this right
Yeah.
now. I know that the deadline has been pushed back another year in terms of having to be compliant, but is there enough runway for firms to get to where they are today, to where they need to be?
I definitely think there is time, especially now that it's been pushed back. But like I said, I think if you're not looking at how you interpret the regulation for your business model, that's where people might come unstuck, because there is so much to look at. But you really need to be taking a step back and saying, what is the intention of the regulation? What's the intention in comparison to what I do, like what my business does, and what impact that does have on the rest of the trading community? Because that's when you start narrowing down, well, where are the most important pieces for me to focus on, and is that, you know, investor protection and product governance, and what I offer my clients has got to be, you know, perfect, and market abuse regulation, senior management regimes, like it's just obviously endless. But if you're in a place where the service you offer is very technology driven, for example, if you're an algorithmic trading firm, then the areas you're going to look at are going to be completely different. Algo testing is a massive part of the regulation, but that may be very different for someone else in the chain. They may not have to touch that at all. So it really does come down to not being bewildered by the extent of the regulation and really understanding its impact on you as a firm and your client base.
So the first place to start is with some sort of grading system, sort of prioritization system. These items are red. If we don't get those right, we're in trouble. These things are important, but we can get to them. And then there's some other things. How would you go about making that segmentation?
Well, firstly, I would think you would look at what your core competencies are as a firm and what you could outsource. Now, outsourcing is a hot topic at the moment, because you can outsource the functionality. You can have, there are lots of ISVs out there, you know, really looking at what they can do to help the industry, and that's great. But the obligation that comes from the regulation often cannot be passed on. So you have to be very careful when you engage with a service provider that what they're doing actually is compliant with the regulation. And you know, the large service providers, obviously they will be, they're key in the market. They're actually pushing forwards with some of the regulation to make sure some of the areas that don't make too much sense right now are being ironed out ahead of the deadline. But I think that's a good place to start, is what you can actually do internally and what you can't. And from then on is, okay, once you've decided what you're going to tackle internally, is really to prioritise it by how big the project is, because like we said, data management is a big thing, and I think ultimately anything to do with data is probably where people will be starting. Reporting is huge. Obviously with EMIR, another regulation, derivatives reporting, that's kind of given people a bit of an insight into what's required. But fundamentally, again, you have to look at whether MiFID II, MiFIR reporting is actually going to be in line with that. There are plenty of arguments about how those different regimes don't actually align. And you can, you know, like you said, you can look to other places to see how people have done it and what is the best way of implementing, best way of project managing this. The US was a good example. A lot of things that we're tackling here now, they have already tackled.
Well, that was one of the questions I wanted to ask you. Are there any sort of poster childs out there that you can point to say they've got those elements right? I mean, do those best-in-class templates exist?
It's an interesting question. I think everybody would probably have a different answer to that, depending on who you speak to. But I do think there is a lot to learn from the US, and you know, you look at the CEFs and the swap platforms and how that's going to translate here, and you look at best execution there, and you can see what will probably occur here. And going back to what I said earlier, consolidated tape is really a really big part of the regulation that we haven't got to grips with. It right here in the UK, it doesn't make sense right now for anybody to take that challenge on of becoming a CTP, because they don't see a monetary benefit. The industry has come together several times now to try and solve this problem, and the regulators just keep stipulating that it has to be done and the industry has to take hold of it, but they don't really push it any further than that. And ultimately that's a real block for the industry. The whole everywhere in the market would be better served if there was one.
In that particular case, how then do we unblock that?
That's something I'm not sure I've got an answer to. I've got to say.
Well, it's the it's the multi-billion-dollar question, isn't it?
It is, and it could be then is maybe some slight let up in the way that data pricing is being managed by the regulators to provide some incentive for someone in the industry to take that job on board, or the regulators themselves have got to come up with a way to fully enforce it.
So if we bring our conversation to a close, what are the 2 or 3 key things that I should be doing on Monday, back at the office?
Yeah.
I've probably already started with my MiFID II program. What are the points I should be checking on? Where should my focus be?
Well, if you're the program manager for the MiFID II implementation, you really have to be making sure that you're very close to the various stakeholders within your business, that being legal, compliance, front office, middle office. You really have to know who all those people are, what impact on them the regulation is going to have, and really kind of understand the whole business. Not regulation, you can read text and you can interpret it in a certain way, and you can have lawyers interpret it from a legal perspective, but actually understanding what that translates to on a day-to-day basis in your business is where the focus should be. And there are swathes of compliance people looking at regulation, but I think actually it's where you meet people in the business, in the front office, who dealing with the consequences on a day-to-day basis, who provide some colour that actually then go, okay, right, I get what the text says, but now I've actually got to twist this, and is there a way that we can actually turn this to our advantage, or is this just something we have to just get on with and do, and there's no benefit here, it's just a cost? And I think really having that business understanding of what the regulation means is the key starting place.
Rachel, I really appreciate you giving us some time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.